Hey guys, it's Shubro here. I'm here with Lewey. Lewey was a former HoloLens team member, worked at Xbox, and is currently working on an augmented reality startup. So my main question for Lewey is why don't we have AR yet? But before we get into that, let's jump into Versus, right? So I'm going to share the screen and show our viewers what exactly we're talking about. So Versus is powering the spatial web. What is the spatial web?
Okay. So in terms of what the spatial web is, I'll start with the problem and then I'll go into the technical definition. So the problem is that the world is going through some really deep changes, and one of the fundamental elements that needs to shift to make those changes happen is spatial communication. How we literally communicate about communal space. At the micro level, this is how we are trading we're both in an office together. There's a shared kitchen, what's private, what's public, who owns what, where things go. At the macro level, this is the planet itself, how's the ecosystem doing, how's the air, how are the oceans, and how do we use all of that. And sort of in the middle, there's world government and smart cities and all of that. And so it's all of these different scales of spatial communication is what we think needs to be quantified and made into the actual basis for the internet.
So how do you quantify space?
Absolutely. So the technical definition of the spatial web is that it's the subset of the internet that is spatially addressed and spatially contracted. So spatially addressed like a map. You zoom into a certain area and you see the stuff there. The problem is that on most maps, when you're doing that, you're actually talking to a single server to get that piece of information. The ideal is that you'd actually be talking to that area. You'd have a full spatial networking to get the information from that area back to you. In AR, this is actually very critical because you're effectively looking into a map all the time.
Right. So would you say something like GPS is enough for the spatial web, or do you need more coordinates, more data, more precise definitions of objects and spaces? And how do you solve that? How do you solve having a system for tracking objects and space and ownership throughout time?
Right. That's a great question. I think with GPS, we've seen this massive boost in how much is done spatially. Also, it's led us into spatial contracts. So like Uber and UPS, we can actually say, move this to there or move me from here to over there, sort of the core of getting people to communicate spatially. I think the next major step to understand augmented reality is you have to go past just a static reference frame of the Earth and go to relative coordinates. For instance, inside of a car, if you move from one seat to the other, you probably don't describe that as like in longitude and latitude, where did you move, but actually relative to the space of the car, where did you move within that?
Right. So you're saying GPS coordinates is very high level. It's not enough for the spatial web. In the spatial web, things like who's sitting in what seat of a car matter. It seems like you guys have a very lofty goal, which is literally to map the world and to map it as it changes over time and to quantify and track that. Are you guys also looking into ownership, that I own this cup or I own this room? And how do you deal with that in your protocol?
So that is what we call spatial contracting. So it's not just about ownership, but it's about the permissions around an object. Our goal with this is that instead of trying to express the permissions abstractly or symbolically, we express them spatially. For instance, these chairs, we're allowed to move them to a fair extent, but we're not allowed to take them out of the room, out of the building. These are the kind of spatial permissions that even the very concept of ownership should really be and is legally expressed in terms of spatially, how can you move that thing? Or what rights do you have to interact or modify that object?
So the main challenge that appears here, in my view, is how do you know if this chair is still in the room? What's monitoring this chair or this cup at any given time so that you are aware of where this is, who is in possession of it, and is this violating any rules regarding it, that it cannot leave this domain?
Rather than chase after the individual answers to that problem, we believe that eventually it's going to be a homogeneous mix, heterogeneous mix of a number of different technologies. Cameras that are able to track our position, GPS, individual electromagnetic tracking, and there are numerous different answers to this. Our belief is that once you have a core spatial language, it allows these different mechanisms to work together to give you a correct solution. I really want to make it clear we're not trying to create the central database of everything. We are trying to create the language by which you talk to other devices about something.
I see. And would you want like other companies and individuals to interact in this language by providing their data and their setup?
Answer questions in that language.
Understood.
In that way, also for decentralization purposes, it's actually a rather important point. So just wanted to say that.
Makes sense.
In terms of ownership, then I think you are getting into cases where you intentionally, to some extent, don't want privacy. If you own the lease to a building, you want that to be, to some extent at least, provable to somebody else that you have that agreement. There's some really powerful technologies called claims around credentials and proofs that can be shown in zero knowledge proof way to prove that you have ownership of something without actually giving away all of the details of that thing.
Right.
Our belief is that by using these decentralized identifiers and decentralized claims, that you'll be able to sort of prove ownership of a different object or different things in where it's legally required without having to give away your identity or numerous other aspects of yourself and your privacy.
So just to summarize, companies, individuals, anyone can throw data about space, right, about what's going on in different rooms, different places on Earth, and regarding different objects. Once you have that data in a specific way, we can use the HSTP to talk to the rest of the spatial web, and you can contribute to the spatial web. So the goal isn't for you guys to map everything, but to let people join the spatial web and add their little part of it to the overall greater web. And so in theory, or theoretically, this can converge to almost every sensor being connected to the spatial web and working in a way that's now that original vision that you have knowledge over where everything is, or to the extent that you can, and everything's governing itself through smart contracts. That could be where this potentially can go. That's one of the outcomes.
That is absolutely the goal.
What's a use case of the spatial web at the moment, or when this technology is ready? What's the first set of use cases that you see?
Absolutely. So some of our initial clients are in warehousing and general supply chain tracking, because obviously it's the movement of assets is what we really care about. So one of the interesting things has been going through and helping warehouses go from more abstract representations to far more literal, put the item in the box, put the box in the truck. And that spatial rephrasing of the problem actually greatly simplifies what is trying to be expressed and allows it to be generalized, expressed in AR, expressed over the web, expressed over phones in a very natural and clean way that you can start to add other sensors to improve. And it also gives a common language between us and even robots who are actually competing for similar jobs.
Right. So you bring up a lot of interesting topics there. So one use case of this could potentially be to usher in a new form of gig economy where you can use augmented reality to navigate the spatial web to find, okay, here's a box, and this box needs to be moved over there. And if I do that, that somehow is contributing to some effort of some organization. That's one of the use cases, right?
Absolutely.
And be it robots or humans, anyone can do this. Right? Anyone can contribute to these tasks that are available on the spatial web. So do you see this bringing in almost a new era of the gig economy where anyone who may not be skilled can now use this augmented reality app to navigate the spatial web and find tasks that they should accomplish, which maybe currently are tasks that are being accomplished by skilled laborers such as construction workers or whatnot?
Absolutely. A key part of the spatial web is to contextualize information. So you're going to contextualize the need that somebody wants this thing moved. Right now, they might be texting their friends asking them to move it, but it's very hard to see that reprojected back into the world. So it solves that element of it. And what's back to your point about the gig economy, what it also changes is the ability for other people to learn how to do that thing. Like they can sort of look at the video, but now the video can be actually reprojected into the world. And then ultimately, instead of that being just an item that you are paying it to do, it'll end up more like sort of favors for friends, where you are starting to trade in things that are not necessarily just money, but in terms of, if I sweep the floor, you can put the chairs. Right? We can start to trade in what I believe will ultimately be more natural currencies. And that as more parts of ourself are quantified with these numerous different sort of tracking of what the body actually needs, I think we'll have a much clearer layout of what the different elements are that we need to incorporate into our life. And we'll be far more able to trade in the actual things that you need directly without needing the intermediary of money. Obviously, money is not going anywhere for a long time.
Right. That's fascinating, though. So if you can exchange any object in the spatial web, right, and that is almost itself a form of currency. Are you guys using cryptocurrencies as a backbone for this? Are you how is this currency? What is the currency aspect to the spatial web that you just described?
Absolutely. Well, so one, I should say, we have numerous economic experts on our team. They are really passionate and really, let's say, that smart. So they'll know the details about that. What is interesting for me is
I have a MakerDAO t-shirt on, so I'm an economic expert as well.
Right. And, being in this job, I've been humbled by the depth of true economic, planning and price scales and all these sort of things. What I really see as very interesting is how we can start to have like this plurality of currencies. The metaphor that I look at a lot is a forest, where they don't really have a unified currency in the forest. There's water and there's air and there's numerous different elements like nitrogen and carbon and all that.
Energy maybe is the closest thing that we have to a pure currency. Right?
Totally. And the different forms of energy, and there's some that we process in certain ways. And I think that's part of what makes a forest feel sort of calm or enjoyable to be there, is that you've got this complex flow of different elements. And that's, I think, where the quantified itself.
It's been a while since I've been in the forest. But
they're very nice. And so that another good example might be Burning Man, where people have voluntarily chosen to not use money for a certain number of days and to trade purely, or in fact just to gift purely to each other and see how the relationships grow. And in that way, you start to realize that that which is actually needed to interact with the world is far more complex. It can't really be mapped down to one dimension. There's a lot of things that I think really can't be expressed in one dimension. And in a sense, that's a mathematical proof that we need a plurality of currencies.
Sure. So are you saying we would have multiple currencies operating within Versus, or that Versus should operate as a barter economy where I trade this object that somehow I own and that's written on the blockchain that I own this with your pair of sunglasses over there, for example?
I think it will be both, that you will, in some sense, do a lot of just sheer bartering, also including space and time, and the right to be in a space is also an asset as such, as well as there being a plurality of traditional currencies that sort of zero-sum currencies.
Right.
And it's the mixture of the two that I think is actually going to give us the right kind of balance that we need in our world, not all of one and not all of the other.
Understood. Not to get too much into the details, do you know which currencies will be available on HSTP?
Real estate and time rental, I think, will be a really big one.
Right. But would that be measured in dollars or some other, or is there some other mechanism of measuring the value of these things?
Ultimately, the currency is tied to an authority mechanism. So in the case of dollars, it's tied to the US government. In the case of Ethereum and Bitcoin, it's tied onto the main nets of those services.
Absolutely.
So as much as you put assets on those networks, that will be the currency that you use.
Okay, so it's up to you as the person using the HSTP to decide what currency governs the relationship between these objects that you're putting forth into this web of the spatial web.
Yes, absolutely.
Understood.
I think we'll have some good options, and I look forward to discussing them at the right time.
I'm looking forward to Bitcoin and Ethereum being supported. So just going back to that example of someone moving a box from location A to location B, and that being a gig in this new gig economy of the spatial web, where I guess any job that requires physically moving things or tracking things would be susceptible. Do you think this is eventually where the future of work is going, at least for pretty much any blue-collar job where almost by definition it's having to do with things and moving things physically?
I would actually argue that the present of work is already that. Most modern jobs are actually defined as you have to be here at a certain time. You have to move this thing over there.
Right.
You are allowed to be in a certain space for a certain amount of time. I'm paying you to move me from here to there, or to move this object from here to there. It's a little bit of a surprise for me that we're in 2019 now, and when most people talk about a legal contract over the internet, they mean a PDF. And I really think we could do better in terms of specifically what do we mean with the contract, and this needs to go over there. This information is not allowed to leave these premises. It must go into here. So I would actually argue that almost all legal contracts are ultimately about time and space, and what needs to be there or not be there at different times or in what amounts. And I really look forward to the quantization of a legal system. There have been numerous efforts in this regard, and I think the sort of missing piece has been the spatialization.
So would you say that HSTP will be used as a component or maybe the backbone of a greater push towards having legal documents codified in actual code where you can enforce this without people, right? And so you need this layer that interfaces with the real world, and that can be provided by HSTP. Because one of the questions I've always had is let's say you wanted to rent out your apartment to somebody and you wanted a smart contract to mediate this. At the moment, you need oracles to somehow understand that the person actually went into the house, the person paid their rent, stayed there for X amount of days. Do you think that bit of fuzziness at the moment can be replaced by something more objective like the spatial web?
Absolutely. Well, and the language that the numerous different oracles use to communicate with each other itself needs to be spatialized. And that's actually the crux of the piece that's missing.
Right.
I do expect that there will be other languages for spatial contracts and spatial communications. Our goal, especially for our clients, is to get them into a world where they can be easily translated between different spatial languages. Because, at the end of the day, everything will be compared against the ground truth, which is where it literally is on the globe. And so as long as you have a language that ultimately ends up as that, we think that it will be compatible with our network. And that's a huge part of why many of our customers believe in our mission, because even if we get the words wrong, it'll be easily translatable into the right one when it does come.
Right. That's so fascinating. So not only are you guys building the backbone of maybe a future gig economy, you're also building the backbone of potentially legal smart contracts becoming the norm.
That's 100% the goal. I don't necessarily agree with every current law that we have. But I really do think that the right way to sort of elevate our conversations about laws is to help everyone see literally all of the ones that we have, see them in context. And I think out of that, the right conversation can occur to even know what the right answer would be. And I suspect we won't find that answer until we're all able to look at the current legal system in terms of what it actually means for our daily lives.
No, that's so brilliant. And just to step back, right, what we really are talking about here is a complete rebuild of how economics and legal systems work based on a more objective framework that can understand the world and objects in it. So there's two very distinct categories there, the work and the legal, right? And so just to step back into the work domain, I'm fascinated by where the world is going in terms of how people are working in the next 10, 20 years. Because you have this major force of automation. But not only that, which that's a topic I talk about in a lot of other videos, but not only that, you also have this kind of breaking down of work into smaller and smaller chunks that people can do, mediated by technologies like augmented reality, which are really getting there at this moment. So do you see a day where maybe we don't even need construction workers or Uber drivers? Everyone just pops into the car and says, okay, today I'm going to use this driving app powered by the spatial web to tell me what gigs to accomplish. Go pick up a package here, go pick up a passenger there, right? Or go here and take this box and put it into the truck, and the truck self-drives, or somebody else gets into the truck using the spatial web and drives it, and they don't even know that they're working together. And it's like coordinating this almost hive mind of activity. Do you think that's where things are going?
Yes, absolutely. I think we see a lot of the early stages of that are coming out. Yes, totally. With Uber and UPS and all these different systems. And what is really interesting to me is the moment when we start getting what we would call decentralized routing across it. Each one of those networks is really a routing network. They connect you to a provider and help get the thing from A to B. Ideally, the actual routing and how that is done could actually be done on an open network. In fact, I suspect that even if you were to use blockchain, that the gas prices on that would be less than it would cost than the current cut that is taken by these different groups.
Oh, for sure. By far.
Sure, yeah. So it could be numerous cents instead of multiple dollars per sort of routing transaction. And that actually opens up a pretty clear route to do fully decentralized routing across these whole networks. What I would just like to add to that personally is that what really interests me is that moment when we start tying in the ecological state into this. So what is actually good for the environment? And then the AIs aren't just trying to optimize for the most money spent or something like that. They're actually trying to optimize for what is the long-term health of the planet. Right. And just that shift to me is going to be extremely valuable. I suspect both politically, but then also ecologically. In some sense, it's already helped.
That's amazing. So you hang around with a lot of smart economists, like you said, right? Where do you see the economy going in 5 to 10 years? Are most people who are unskilled just part of this gig economy that's guided by apps and AR? And then there's a few of us developing all these things. And do you think that there will be enough jobs in this new way of doing work for everyone? And would the pay be high enough? Because if you're discretizing work into smaller and smaller chunks, it takes less on the skill to do it. And so if minimum wage laws don't really improve, we're just going to push the majority of people into the lowest category. And just to preface that, I am completely for this economy and this future that you're describing. But I think there also needs to be a social conversation around maybe capitalism starts breaking down at some point with AI, with AR, and the gig economy coming in before full autonomy, right? So what are your thoughts on the social implications of this, and will there be enough jobs and enough money in those jobs in the next 5 to 10 years for the average person?
A few points on that. One, I suspect apps are going to mostly go away, and that it'll go to almost entirely verbal spatial contracting. Like, hey, please move that over there, and that you won't need a custom app for that. The act of saying it will automatically create the contract and be there. So that, and also, the instructions, instead of being like a 3D model with a cursor and all that, you'll must probably just get a recorded hologram of the person that really knows how to do that thing.
Jesus.
Well, and so, like I look at email and texting and all these different sort of like chat mediums. And the irony is that most of the time you're not really looking at the app, you're looking at someone that knows what they're talking about. Let's say if they're funny or they're your friend. And so ultimately, I really think that most of the content on the spatial web, one, it's going to be hyper-local. It's going to be people that you know, just like yourself. Right. You spend most of your time actually dealing with like a social interaction.
Right.
So I suspect apps in that sense are going to sort of fade down. So I'm not too worried about that. In terms of the jobs, I suspect that it's going to start to pretty drastically change, in that once the gig economy really kicks in, it's much less about trying to make money as a franchise and much more about really doing your own thing in your own kind of way and embracing the natural space that is around you. Again, very sort of Burning Man-ish. And so ultimately, what I think people will find is that they'll be looking less at worrying about their wallet and their money, and more at what would actually make their life better. And that in so doing, it's like following their heart, as some people would say. And as they are doing that, they'll actually find completely different paths and venues for what's interesting for them. They'll be able to sort of do more of a sharing economy with other people around them to achieve that. I'm a little bit of a hippie, and so when you're on these like shared communal spaces, it's amazing how well everything goes. And like very rarely does anyone even talk about money, because they're actually much more interested in like, are you going to clean the dishes? And like, are you going to do these other things that to really support the community? Right. And I suspect that if we go down that route, that we have a much better chance of trying to find our natural balance with those around us, and that a lot of these problems about there's not enough jobs or whatever, that comes from effectively trying to chase an artificial currency that isn't actually the one that you need.
No, that's fascinating, and I have a couple of points on this. And space and population are almost inexorably linked. So I have some questions on population increasing and how that will affect the spatial web, or how the spatial web will be able to accommodate for that. Just to ask, this technology, which is being conceived in a capitalistic society, right, where we already have a system of how people should interact, almost dictated in our law. Do you think something like a sharing economy, I completely get that this can come about using the HSTP and the technology that you guys are creating, but would that come about in our current society in America, at least, where, hey, maybe I'm all about contributing to the community here, and I find meaning in things that are not necessarily like construction or increasing production, but where do I get the ability to buy food and have access to a specific location for me to sleep in, right? That's the two things we need, food and shelter. So where does that come into the equation as people get marginalized more and more into more and more discretized tasks, which are not as valuable? And not only that, those tasks are getting smaller and smaller each time you solve a new machine learning problem. Maybe that's one of those discretized tasks that are now gone, right? So I'm saying, there's nothing that guarantees food and shelter in this economy for people. Or do you think that there would be a natural tendency towards that somehow manifesting? Like, without the political will to implement something like UBI, is this going to be a problem? And this is a question of politics, not of slowing down the technology. I completely disagree with anyone that thinks we should slow down the technology.
Oh yeah, I'm just processing for a second. Part of the problem is you really have to think about what are we actually optimizing for. And I suspect that the thing we're going to be optimizing for the most in the near future has a lot to do with Earth's ability to maintain life. And the act of doing that is going, in some sense, to cause us to rethink some major elements. On one hand, I do think that the smart city initiatives are effectively like the quanta itself, just at a bigger scale, and that as a part of those efforts, they're going to start to realize all of the different things that they really need that really aren't just money, but it's numerous things that you often can't buy with money. You have to slowly grow them. I believe that process of requantification is going to really help people understand their true priorities, especially governments understand, and that in the act of doing that, the right sort of things will happen for people around jobs and housing and that whole space.
Right.
And then ultimately that is going to also have an ecological level. I would personally recommend to everyone to expect some crazy stuff to happen. There's a lot of big changes to occur, and to sort of brace yourself and like get prepared, do whatever self-healing you need to do, so that you are ready to adapt the changes that are coming, not just because of the environment, because those are going to be really strong, but also because of socially the kind of things that you're going to be asked to do. Right. So now would be a good time to stay very nimble on your feet. I wish there was a nicer way to say that, but I do think it's pretty good advice.
Yeah, I agree. And this is part of the conversation we're trying to have in Human Minds, because I think a lot of us, especially deeper in technology, are realizing that these things are moving pretty fast, and the implications of these technologies are going to be vast on society. And so you talk about that we need to shift our utility function as a society. That right now our utility function, almost in the reinforcement or AI sense, right? What are we trying to maximize for? So anyway, you're saying there needs to be a shift in our utility function away from just maximizing production, just maximizing the creation of stuff as we head more and more towards post-scarcity. But who gets to decide what the new utility function is, and how do we make that shift occur? Because currently we have existing power structures that are whose almost job to some extent is to self-perpetuate. Right? Power structures exist because they haven't crumbled yet. They're good at keeping themselves in power and keeping the current operating system that they're running going. And this does not support what we're talking about that's coming from the spatial web and augmented reality and advances in artificial intelligence. So I'm just seeing a complete disconnect in how fast technology is moving relative to our ability to accommodate for this and shift our thinking as a society. Right?
Well, so I don't think it's mine or anyone in our industry's lot in life to tell people what they should be doing. The only thing that we can ever really help with is to help them see the truth. See the truth about the economy around them, to see the truth about where things are and the nature, and then also to see the truth in terms of how do you contextualize the meanings of these new shifts and technologies in our life. So it's that core ability to know thyself. It's like how do you contextualize information for people? That to me is the point of the spatial web, and then at that point you'll be able to make your own decisions about how to handle it, because it's going to be very personal.
Right. I want to make it almost philosophical point here. This is something I've been thinking about for a while. Like, who gets to decide what the rules are, right? And there's one way to think about this that has appeared to me, which is different people set forth different rules, and people decide which set of rules they want to be governed by. And this already exists. It's cryptocurrencies. Every cryptocurrency is proposing a specific way of operating that cryptocurrency and how much more is minted and the things you can do there. And you decide if you think that's a good system. And you, by participating in that protocol, are giving a vote that these are the set of rules that I want to be governed by. If you have a smart contract, for example, whose goal is to mediate how a company should operate in terms of equity and investing and all of this, right? And you have a few different versions of that, right? So those are the different rules of the game. And people will sort themselves into which rules they want to be part of. And then you'll see that one of them maybe forms a majority where people are agreeing that these are the fair set of rules to participate in. So do you see something like an organic shift happening where the spatial web and smart contracts are now allowing people to operate like outside of the current economic and legal system? And if there's enough of them doing that, then we formed a second economy. And then this transition has already happened from the old way of doing things to here's a new set of rules for governing ourselves in a better way. I can see there's another follow-up question to that, but do you see something like that organically emerging, a second economy, decentralized, organically emerging by people deciding what rules they want to adhere to?
Well, it has certainly emerged, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
I do really care a lot about physically what is happening in the world, ecologically and physical ownership. And to some extent, this is what the countries are, right, and have been for hundreds thousands of years, right? Different groups, you can choose to associate yourself with one or the other, and sometimes you don't get a choice. I love they do.
So that's a really great point. So it's almost like now we've abstracted what a country is into the domain of law, and I can pick whatever you want, and there's no physical need to be in this place to be operated by this set of laws. You see what I'm saying?
Yes, except for there is a need to physically be somewhere.
That's right. That's right.
Even computers have to physically be somewhere.
That's right. But the rule set doesn't change. You don't need to move somewhere for the rule set to change, right? Now you've abstracted away almost what nations do into the level of code and map, and now you pick which one. People get to pick which one they want to be part of.
Within that virtual world, certainly they get to choose.
Sure. Okay. Does it have to be a virtual world, or it can be some subset of the real world, right?
So we are strong believers in what we call local consensus networks, where you can form in amongst yourselves private rules for how you want to operate. I was raised in South Africa, and my dad used to say that on our land, Black people had rights. Now, for everyone who lived there, we upheld that rule, but the police didn't. And it was an interesting case where we were forming rules that diametrically opposed to it. But that local consensus network was still able to operate. We treat each other fairly.
So you bring up a very interesting point, which was actually the second part of the question I was going to ask, which is as these new structures mediated by technology start to emerge and they get big enough, they will conflict with the existing power structures, just like the example you gave of your farm, having your local set of rules that you all believe in, and then the state saying something else. So as smart contract mediated relationships and organizations grow, and to a size that it hits or catches the attention of the current political system, and they're like, hey, we're not happy about how you're operating there outside of our jurisdiction. What do you think is going to happen? And that's where this phase shift starts almost hitting a wall of...
Well, I always love the definition of government is that they are the group that is authorized to use force to resolve conflict.
I love it.
Yeah, definitely. So they are authorized to use force to resolve conflict, and so they are. When it comes to those kind of conflicts you're mentioning, I'm like, well, one of those groups is authorized to do something about it, right? Ultimately, I'm most interested in not trying to see a dichotomy between the real world and the physical world, and I think the two are going to completely meld. I do think we need to be able to digitally represent the existing legal system, and then out of doing that, we'll create the safe space to evolve both, if need be. But I'm a strong believer that just creating an alternative world and trying to live in it might not necessarily be the right way to lift up everyone. It'll end up being sort of isolated by definition.
Fair enough. So how do you...
This is an approach.
Sure. How do you connect to the current legal structure? As you build out this HSTP and people are starting to connect to it, how do you get the authorities to recognize that a transfer in ownership under the HSTP protocol is legally binding? Like, when does the legal system start incorporating these things?
And how does it in a few ways? So, there are areas like, I believe in Nevada, where blockchain does actually constitute legal ownership of something. Ultimately, the way to bring everyone on board is to offer them good old value. One of the things that we're offering to, say, smart cities is that it would be nice if the, say, scooters or something like that were actually managed by both the government and their owners. Like a taxi driver is responsible both to the government, but also to the owner of the taxi company. And ultimately, the scooters should be the same. And so these sort of ideas of a shared communal space and how you can share ownership and share rules across multiple different parties, I believe are actually really critical to the very complex agreements that most local governments are involved in. It's incredibly complex what they're doing, right? Water rights and piping and transport. There's so many parties are involved, and just helping them organize all of that information and helping them to visualize it and contextualize it, to me, is the way that you facilitate their existing operation. You start to quantify all of their existing rules. You're adding value all along the process, and then ultimately they end up going to that as the first mechanism, and that eventually becomes the codification of the law.
Wow. So you think because of the value proposition of these systems, businesses will start adopting them, and as they do more and more so, the government will have to recognize these, and there will be an organic kind of propagation into the legal system over time.
And I think that's the right way to do it, and I would point to the internet as kind of like the right way to do that with Scrum, where at first it was like, oh, now we're going to publish a little bit more data on the web, now we're going to publish the laws, now we're going to start connecting them, and it'll just slowly build up. It's like a digitization, and the next logical phase is spatialization.
Exactly. Well, the optimistic part of me hopes that this will happen. The pessimistic part of me thinks that we might face some obstacles from our slow-moving political system in terms of the recognition and adoption of these technologies. And if you have 15 minutes, I would like to cover two more topics, and then we can wrap it up. So a lot of these technologies are relying on robust machine vision to recognize that, hey, here's a cup, here's a smartphone, and the smartphone is recognizing that there's a cup and a table here, and so then it will relay to the spatial web that this cup still exists here and it exists in this condition and all that. Do you think the machine learning is there to solve the challenges needed for the spatial web?
I think that enough of it, enough of the computer vision is there. What to do? I think it's going to get phenomenally better. Yes, absolutely. Right. It was only this year they added skeletal tracking onto the iPhone. Right. I was actually working with it about 10 years ago on Xbox. So, or 8 years ago. So, will the object recognition get a lot better? Absolutely. The most important elements are there currently. Apple has standard file formats for object recognition now built into the operating system, both macOS and iOS.
So any developer without having a machine learning background can use Apple's smartphones machine vision and use that in their applications.
Yes, absolutely. Brilliant. Just to download away.
Brilliant.
And as well as just the core devices having a really good gyroscopes and accelerometers, so they're able to track their own movement very well, tie that with the slime recognition that is now built in. That I really think is enough to get us to the initial stage of it working together. And then we've seen some really excellent work like Microsoft's Azure spatial anchors to allow multiple cameras to share space. And there are numerous other parties that have equipment in different forms that I think actually gives us enough visual anchoring to form a common space, which is the most important element.
Gotcha. Machine vision in particular of all the branches in machine learning and artificial intelligence has made the most progress. And I think we anticipate that this will continue improving. Additional obstacles here really, particularly with machine vision. There's obstacles with planning and language, but not really machine vision. So are you guys still facing problems like, let's say someone's trying to perform a gig on the spatial web, they pick up a box, they're using their smartphone to show that they've picked up the box and that they're putting it in the truck, and they will get paid for that or compensated for that. Sometimes in these machine vision systems, like all of a sudden the box just doesn't get recognized for a couple of frames, and then it gets recognized again. Do you think like the jitteriness of recognizing surfaces and objects that's still to some extent there in machine vision will be a problem? Or is this a domain where you don't need like 100%, but 99% accurate machine vision is enough to really power this new way of doing things through the spatial web? Because 100% is always hard to get to, 100% accuracy.
And I think...
So can you guys tolerate some noise, is the question.
Oh, we can absolutely tolerate quite a lot of noise, actually. So we deal a lot in spatial bounds that help to account for the noise. We try not to represent infinitely finite points because, A, they don't actually exist. So almost everything has a fuzzy bound to it. To the larger question, I think the correct answer is closer to how humans handle it, especially when it comes to computer vision. We're actually mixing multiple different techniques. It's not about just having like one magic one that works in all cases. It's about that mix. For instance, in warehouses, we actually use barcode scanning quite a lot, like old school 1D barcodes, right? Because they're extremely reliable. Right. And which one? So then we mix that with slime tracking, and that gives you like a really good movement, but also really accurate measurement.
What is SLAM tracking, just for those of us?
SLAM tracking is what is built into the modern AR phones, like the iPhone X. Because one of the giant leaps on iPhone X was this, that it can actually see multiple points around the room, and then as you walk, based on how those points have moved, it can tell how the phone itself moved. So it's the way that motion tracking works.
Right. So where the phone is relative to the environment around it.
Yes, gotcha. So SLAM actually stands for simultaneous localization and mapping.
Gotcha.
Meaning that it is sort of localizing itself to this map that it is building dynamically.
Right. So you guys have redundancy in the form of barcodes. You know where the person is. You also have machine vision looking at objects and quantifying what's going on there. And then worst case scenario, if you're a gig worker and the box doesn't get detected, you just move your phone around a little bit and then you'll get credit for your assignment. So it's not a real showstopper to the spatial web and this new gig economy that we're talking about.
Absolutely. I would point, in real life, you are walking down a street, you know where you are on the street and all that, then you see a sign and you know what street you're on. Yeah. And so there you're actually mixing multiple different kinds of computer vision to understand where you are and understand what to do.
So that's fascinating. And it brings a whole new perspective into the future of work for the next 10, 20 years. I'm somebody coming from the artificial intelligence space. And to me, the concern was that as we get self-driving cars and we start automating some of the simpler tasks that can be done by machines that are presently done by humans, we're going to have a shrinking number of jobs for more and more people who are not really who have no fault almost in this process that's happening, right? Like you've driven a truck for your whole life, and now all of a sudden self-driving trucks are a thing. Well, this is like how we need to do something to make sure that this guy is okay, right? Because he was operating under or she was operating under the assumptions that this is the world, and it wasn't going to change this drastically within a lifetime, right? In most human lifetimes, life didn't really change much from birth to death. You live with more or less the same technology, and we're currently at this point in history where technology is evolving and improving at an exponential rate. And a lot of the assumptions you can make about life no longer hold. Like you were saying, be nimble and brace yourself. And so to me, automation was the biggest concern in terms of machine learning really taking over jobs. But from a look at this role of augmented reality and the level of gig economy that it can usher in, it's like we don't even need AI before we start seeing tectonic shifts in the economy. Just like the basics of machine vision that we have right now, put onto an app that can discretize work and coordinate and communicate very complicated tasks among many people who really don't have to know about what's going on overall. That technology itself, which is a lot easier to achieve, and I would say the technological precedence for that is already there, and that's why you guys are building it. Right? That technology is really going to change the economy a lot earlier than we think. So if we're estimating that AI or getting near perfect machine vision for self-driving cars is 20 years away, X years away, right? We're going to see a lot of things before year X just coming out of the basic advances in machine vision equipped with augmented reality and how that's just going to completely transform how we interact with the world. So going back to my original question, why isn't this here yet? Why am I not wearing a augmented reality headset right now and visualizing all the things we're talking about in my space?
Oh, totally. It's almost entirely a manufacturing problem, ironically. When I was on, the HoloLens team, one of the biggest problems is we just couldn't make enough in time. Obviously, we've been working on that. There's a lot of other companies. I expect that kind of device to drop in price very dramatically over the next couple of years. I think the Oculus Quest is a good example of where that's going. And there's still some bits around the display technologies and all that need to be reduced in price. Right. The market is absolutely there. It's just literally a matter of making one.
Gotcha. So that's in terms of the augmented reality devices.
In terms of the longer term scale, I believe it was Gartner predicted that by 2028.
Just to interrupt you really quickly, I have the Gartner hype cycle curve right in front of me, so we can actually look at that as we talk about it, because I wanted to, in this last segment, show the Gartner hype cycle curve, right, for emerging technologies. And right now it has augmented and virtual reality maybe near the peak of hype. So this was done in 2018. There's questions around how accurate this is. I thought it was at the peak of hype when the HTC Vive came out, and I was one of the guys who bought it. So that was like the peak of hype, and that we should be maybe somewhere around here. But do you think they're actually at the stage that the Gartner guys would have us believe? And so the dot is a dark blue dot. So the assertion there is that it's 5 to 10 years away.
Oh, right. So that's they had a report that I found very insightful. That said that by 2028, you will most likely, if you break both your glasses and your cell phone, you will replace the glasses first. And that was their sort of core metric, because at that point, the belief is that you'll need your glasses to do your job, but and that'll include the phone anyway, so that'll be just the first one. I thought that was an interesting transition point that they estimated at 2028, which would be sort of in line with coincide what they're saying.
With the upper bound of what they're saying, actually.
Right. Yeah. Now, that I believe is actually primarily a manufacturing issue in terms of if we had more of them now, we could certainly do it. If you look at the Magic Leap and all this, a lot of these were, which is an excellent device. It's largely about bringing down the price and form factor to really put it to where everyone can have one. And I think all the major companies that know that and are working towards it.
Right. I have no doubt that as soon as the manufacturing aspect of this is solved, the price is just going to come down exponentially. Like every 2-3 years, it's going to get cut down in half, just like we've seen with like graphics technologies, GPUs, microprocessors, and all this. So, you've used the HoloLens and the Magic Leap, I believe.
Yes, both. We actually have an agreement with Magic Leap right now.
Gotcha.
Part of their creator grant program.
Gotcha. So last January 2018, at the height of the crypto bubble, I was very tempted at one point to sell 0.2 of a Bitcoin to buy a HoloLens, but I never ended up doing it. How is this experience with the HoloLens and the Magic Leap, and what kind of quality AR are we talking about? Because a lot of people haven't experienced it yet, but this thing exists and it's like real today, and you're someone who has experienced it. So what is your experience of it?
Well, I think it's great. First thing, to me, I put a hologram into an operating room for a cancer surgery, like an actual cancer surgery.
Wow.
And that moment when the doctor could, instead of looking at the sheet with the X-ray, could actually look at the patient, could see it. We even built something where, as she moved towards it, the skin would sort of fade away. She could look at it from different angles, actually plot her path through the muscle groups.
Wow.
That moment of really being able to contextualize the information to where it needs to be, I think is there currently, and it is mind-blowing, and it is extremely important. It's not about being immersed in a different reality. It's about enhancing the reality that you're already in. And that is the real power of AR. And so that, to me, I think they've absolutely delivered on the core promise of seeing the information in the world where it needs to be. And now it's just a matter of expanding that out into more different applications and actually tying into everyday work. The irony is that AR is not really for information workers. It's kind of for everyone else.
For blue-collar workers.
It's for people that are engaging with the physical world. You've got a whole bunch of cameras that are looking at the physical world. So it's really meant for people that are engaging with the physical world, like food or movement or items or anything where you're actually dealing with the real thing. That is where AR is best. If you are using it to check your email, you could maybe do that on the phone.
I would disagree with that. I would want that Minority Report set up in front of me with an AR headset. I could see my data science work and machine learning work completely transforming. If I could see all right, here's my neural network training, here's the data, here's my emails. Maybe not the emails, I hate looking at emails, right? But that, just having your full field of vision and space around you for mind work, right? Just like I'm dumping my mind into reality. It helps me offload my memory to an extent that I couldn't have done before, right? So I think not only blue-collar workers, but people who are doing highly intellectual work would benefit from just being able to experience the data and their thoughts, just being able to experience your thoughts in a different ways, what we're talking about with AR.
I absolutely agree.
Yeah.
So for instance, I definitely recommend trying a HoloLens. It has a full version of Windows on it. You can load up a whole bunch of windows. You can actually put them on walls. Bluetooth mouse and keyboard works really well. Right. So that is a very great way to interact. I'd even go, I actually have one of the patents for Excel in 3D.
Wow.
It's on my website. And that goes into, and that goes into the future. And what does it mean to look like a spreadsheet in 3D? And how is that, really possible? So basically, the high numbers are closer to you, the low numbers are further away, and it forms a cube naturally. And so you can actually fade from 2D to 3D, and then eventually all of our information will actually be expressed along this third dimension, which, and I suspect will, in a lot of cases, be search or sort of charting, like it is in that pattern. And that we'll be able to see patterns across our data that are actually not expressible in 2 dimensions. And that is the long-term vision that I would love to do. I think it'll cause a sort of mental awakening, like we haven't even realized once we see the interconnectedness, like just to lay out all of your websites, to sort of knock them over and see the linking words across even emails and websites and chains and tasks, and have that all on one interconnected view.
Yeah. This is going to completely change how we're going to do work, right?
Absolutely.
And so Bitcoin needs to get back up to 15,000 so I can get one of these devices.
So buy now.
Exactly. So if I put an AR cup on this table and I move my head around, will it look just like this cup that's on the table? It will move slightly in its angle, but it will look exactly like it's anchored to that spot.
Oh, certainly. So for flat objects, we can absolutely do that. The tricky part about glass is that it bends the light slightly, so you need a slightly different way to do the rendering to really get it to look right. But on other objects that's sort of flat, you can absolutely nail it. And get the rendering right on that.
Wow, so this is already here. And the first step is just building the technology. Second step is miniaturizing it and getting the cost down. So we've already solved AR, but people are not really that aware of it because it's a bit clunky and it's a bit expensive. The cost, I have no doubt, will come down as it does with all of these technologies, where you have to get through that initial R&D phase, and then you found that optimal structure, and then that will change the market. Are we confident that the technology can be miniaturized, that the physics that are needed for augmented reality can be in a pair of glasses, and the energy needed, the power needed can be in something as compact as a pair of glasses?
Absolutely. Early on, I wondered about the health effects of AR. What I eventually realized is the irony is that when the display is calibrated, there's actually less photons are floating into your eye than when you look at a cell phone. like actually quite drastically less photons.
Wow.
And so in theory, it's actually much more energy efficient to just aim the light directly where it needs to go, instead of trying to like spray it all around it.
Right.
Something catches your eye.
Right. That's fascinating. Most people don't think about that, right? It's very targeted. Like Apple was listening to this whole conversation. I'm telling you, this future is going to be very interesting in these next 10 years. So
we have to get the privacy right.
Exactly. And that's a whole host of issues that I won't get into on this podcast. So we're talking about a future where potentially monitors are no longer needed. We're doing tasks that are guided by AR. So it's almost like our knowledge of how to do tasks has just exploded by orders of magnitude, reducing the cost of labor, letting us discretize tasks and coordinate with one another almost in a way that has never been precedented or possible before. This is the future we're talking about. Gartner thinks it's 10 years away. Lewey agrees. The technology is already here. We've done the R&D. It's about just miniaturizing it and getting the cost down. And I can tell you from the machine learning side of things that machine vision isn't where the bottleneck is. And so AR just requires machine vision, and that means the promise of AR and the technologies and the spatial web that Lewey is talking about are all pretty much here. It's just a matter of time before they start being utilized in the real world. So for those of us who are fascinated by the spatial web and augmented reality, right, those of us that are fascinated by what you're talking about, which goes beyond just let's create a startup to make money. You guys are completely trying to transform the game in a way that I think we can all agree is a better and more efficient way of going about the game in the first place. So if we wanted to contribute to Versus and play an instrumental role in adopting HSTP, how can we and the viewers do that?
So there's a few ways. We have the Versus Foundation, so an open source group. You are glad to communicate with us and help to contribute product or code integrations. And to me, the larger picture of it is to start to look at your own life in terms of what are the actual spatial contracts that you interact with every day, and start to think about how would you really express those and decentralize them. So we have our book called The Spatial Web, written by Gabriel Rene and Dan Mapes. That book is really meant to lay out the really fundamental mind shift that people need to go through to understand how we can actually create a fully decentralized communal space between people. What the shifts are to the economy, to the technology, and how all of that is going to weave together. That to me is that's the most important thing that people need to be embracing at this point.
Right. Just learning about the fact that this exists and this is what the future is looking like is itself useful. And then if somebody wanted to participate in building or contributing digital assets or information to the spatial web, how would they do that at this moment?
Absolutely. So they can contact us directly. We are working on SDKs in JavaScript and in Unity, as well as just in pure Java for enterprise deployment. We have numerous different backends, everything from SQL to blockchain, and pretty much everything in between. GraphDB and all that sort of thing. From a developer perspective, please, learn Unity, learn what DIDs are, learn about how you actually, augmented reality, how you want to do your tracking, your IoT, and start to think about the network that these can form together as one bit. And we should have our SDK available to the public as soon as it's ready.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much, Lewey. It was a pleasure speaking with you.
It's an honor.
Take care.